Brilliant. So yeah, welcome everybody. I think a few more people will join us as we go, but a massive welcome to Ali Wakelin. This is coming back for, is this the second or is this the third?
Second, yeah.
Second. We've chatted lots. It seems like there's more.
Yeah.
The second of your webinars talking about groundwork, and the first one was massively fascinating, and then the second one we've had a little sneaky preview, also looks great, so really looking forward to hearing a little bit more. Ali, will you give us a little bit of intro and background as you start? Yeah, just to let people know your where you've come from and what your background is. Bit of tech stuff, so yeah, if you want to change the size of the slides versus Ali, when we both turn our cameras off, just move the grey line either way and you can see more of Ali or more of your slides. Obviously everything's being recorded like normal, so you can come back and watch at any point if you want a refresher or you want to watch it again just to remind yourself of what you learned. And I'm sure there's something else.
Survey at the end.
Survey at the end, that's the one. Yeah, so if you can fill in the survey at the end, it just gives us an idea of what you've enjoyed and also what you'd like to see in the future. So that's all really, really helpful. So
well, we'll get going. I am the slide master today, so I'll be in the background being the slide wizard for you. We'll come off our cameras and mute now, and over to you, Ali.
Thank you.
Over to you, Ali.
So hi everybody. So I'm Ali Wakelin, and some of you might have come on my first webinar, which was also about groundwork, which was Groundwork 1. If you want to know more about me, then a good place to start is the podcast that's on here. I'm basically a horse trainer and a rider biomechanics coach. I'm a senior coach in the Ride With Your Mind method. But tonight I've got my horse trainer hat on, and it's groundwork. The groundwork I use is based on the training of Andrew McLean, who he's also done several webinars on here, and his webinars were quite full of all the theory and the reasons why. And I did groundwork on sort of how to do his stuff before, so it's quite important to have a look at that. The reason I like his groundwork is it's really based on what you need to do when you ride. So the same cues for riding. It's also very much based on science. And I always like to know why I'm doing something. So that's all about me, I think. So we can then move on to the first slide, which is why would we want to go sideways? Well, we make our horses or want our horses to go sideways virtually every time we have anything to do with them. It might just be in the stable, we would like them to move over when we're mucking out, or when we're going to do a rug or doing the girth up. And a horse that's really easy to move over is an easy horse. And people will say, oh, it's a really polite horse, well-mannered horse, just easy to have around. And if we teach them to move over in the stable with the same cue, the same aid as we want to when we're riding, then that kind of makes things really straightforward for the horse, and we're practicing for riding, even if we're just saying, can you step over while I walk past you to do your water bucket? We also need to be able to open gates sometimes, depends on where you live really. Down here in East Anglia we don't have many gates, but I know some places more up north have a lot of gates, and to be able to do one of those really easily takes so much stress out of riding. The other thing we need to be able to often want to be able to do is lateral work. We'd like to do that when we ride, and it's important for the horse because it develops their suppleness. It also develops their straightness, and a horse that is straight is a horse you can steer. So lateral work is important for all those things. So that's the whys really, and we're going to start right from the very beginning this evening on the how of why we would begin to go sideways. So on the next slide, we're going to look about where we start with this. Now, you really need to have a look at and have done the basic stuff that I did in the first webinar. So Andrew's stuff is all broken down into simple cues, and they're cues that teach a horse to stop, to go backwards, to park, and to go forwards, and also to head lower. And for sideways to work, your horse really needs to be well trained, so really good at understanding those cues, and to also do those cues lightly. So if you haven't watched my first webinar, it would be good to go and do that. If you have, just make sure before you start asking for sideways, you've just done a quick practice at seeing if you can do that, your horse still remembers all of those things. So once you've done that, then we can move on to actually going sideways. So we'll move on to the next slide. So all of the sideways you would want to do is based on either moving the quarters of the horse, the hind legs, or by moving the front legs. And if you can get your horse to do what we call a hind quarter yield and a forelimb abduction, and you can get them to do them separately, you've got everything you need the horse to do right up to the highest level of lateral work. But it's really important that the horse will do those things in isolation. So they'll either move their hindquarters or they'll move their forelegs. In some groundwork systems, horses are taught to move the whole of themselves from just one signal. And I believe this is really because some of the systems are based more in Western riding, where they only really have what they call the side pass, which is where the whole horse goes sideways. But for classical stuff, like to be able to do shoulder in and travers and things like that, you really do need your horse to be able to move either its hind leg or its front leg. And then we combine them with other things to put in the laterals that we do. Also, being able to move one or the other is really important when you're looking at straightness issues in your horse. So that's a hugely important part of this system. Okay, so how do we actually do it? Let's move on to the next slide. So you always start with the hindquarters. This is because moving the hindquarters over is much easier than teaching your horse to move the forelegs over. So get the idea with the hind legs first. Here we have my fairly elderly now, 27-year-old Lusitano Oriente, who is doing this. And we're going to play this slide a few times. Now, once you've watched the first webinar, you'll know about the fact that first you habituate your horse. So that's what's happening here with the stroking. And then we get a horse to move from a light push, and if we need to, a whip tap. So what we want the horse to do is to move the leg that we touch across and under. And you can see Orient doing that from a light touch. Now, if he didn't do it from a light touch, then we would tap. Light taps until the horse learns. And when you first teach a horse this, they may not move their leg. They may kick out with their leg. They may move something else. And we basically need to keep tapping until the horse moves the leg, and then we release. We practice it loads of times, and then the horse will eventually do what Orient here is doing and just move the leg. Another important thing to notice here is that he just takes one step. And that's very important. You need to have control of sideways steps, because there's nothing that some horses like more than what I call random sideways stepping to get out of doing something. So a horse, you'll teach the horse to do a sideways step, and then before you know it, they've done a complete circle around you in sideways, which means they then actually own the steps rather than you. So you see Orient taking a very clear step here. He actually is a bit of a random sidewayser if he's allowed. But what you would need to do is, as the horse takes the step there, you would step back. So you would use your rein to ask the horse to step backwards into a halt. Yeah, so we'll show it once more. The timing would be now step back into halt. And Orient just does that automatically now, but that's really important. The other thing that can happen once you start to teach this, once the horse gets the idea that you're going to teach it, as soon as you start to walk towards the horse, like now, the horse will move. And it's really important that we don't allow that to become the cue for several reasons. One, you don't want your horse that every time you walk towards the saddle area starts moving sideways, because we want them to stand still to mount. We also want the horse to clearly understand that the push on the hind quarter is sideways, because once we're riding, we want to be able to use that cue to back up our single leg aid. And we're not doing ridden stuff tonight, but there is a way to transfer from the quarters to the ridden aid. But it's really important the horse never sees your body moving towards them as a cue. And again, I know that in some systems this is taught, and there's nothing wrong with it, because you need that if you're going to do liberty work. But that's another stage on. First thing is clearly understand what you've just seen here. So that's the hind quarter yield. We're just showing one side tonight. We would also do it obviously on both sides. And something you're looking for when you do this is one side will normally be harder. So on one side, they'll take a nice big clear step, nice and easy, like that. On the other side, you might find maybe they don't want to take the step. They jump sideways, they take a small step. And what we want is symmetry. And so by working on the harder leg, you will gradually get so that both legs are absolutely symmetrical. So that's something to notice and work on at home. So that's the hind quarter yield. We'll now move on to the next slide. Now, the forelimb abduction. This is harder than Orient is making it look here, because there's a big design fault with horses. And the big design fault is that their necks bend. And often what happens is you use your rein wanting your horse to turn, and a turn step is one step of foreleg abduction. And instead of the leg moving, the horse's head moves and the leg doesn't. And once your horse's head moves, you're actually putting all their weight on the leg you would like to lift up. And that leads to, in ridden work, what we, in my system, call jackknife. You often see this in riding school ponies when their head may go right, but their body goes left. A bit like when your trailer jackknifes because you haven't worked out which way to turn the wheel. So it's really important that horses learn to step with their neck straight. Now, Orient's making this look very easy. And you can see that the handler here, she puts her hand to the right and he immediately steps his right leg right. And then the other leg catches up. So we watch her doing it again here. Her hand goes right, he steps right. Now, this isn't generally a given when you first start. So it'll be fun when you go and try this on your own horses. You'll probably find in one direction, this may happen. And in the other direction, your horse's head is going to bend. So the way we train this is, and it was really hard when we filmed this, our handler here is actually tapping the horse's left shoulder, but you can't see it because her arm's in the way. So for a right forelimb abduction, which is what you're seeing here, the person needs to do a push and then a tap on the horse's left shoulder. And once the horse understands what the tap means and steps their right leg, then you would release the tap and release the rein. So the sequence you would do here is ask with the rein. If not the right thing happens or the horse's neck bends, you immediately do the push and then the tap on the shoulder. And then once the horse takes the step, you release the tap and obviously the rein. But it can be quite tricky because it's about not bending the neck. Problems that can happen. First of all, the horse bends its neck, like we've already said. The other thing that can happen is that the horse steps forward. And we absolutely do not want the horse to step forward, because when a horse takes a sideways step, whether it's for lateral work or for turning when you ride them, they need to be able to move their weight back towards their hind legs. So in jargon, lighten the forehand. And if a horse takes a forward step when you ask for sideways, they're not doing that. They're not lightening the forehand. So what you might need to do is, as you ask them to take the step, if you feel them go to come forward, you need to add a little bit of a backwards on the rein so the horse goes slightly backwards and sideways. Again, once a horse has learned this, and Orient obviously knows how to do this, you will see that as you go to ask for sideways, you'll actually feel the horse and see the horse shift its weight back to make the step. So they start to understand that as the postural thing that needs to happen. So the other thing you need to think about is they obviously need to do this in both directions. And a horse will generally take a big step in one direction. This is a really big step that Orient's taking here. And in the other direction, they will try to bend their neck. They will try to maybe take a small step. And they may try to move the wrong leg first. So cross their leg over. If any of these things go to happen, it's just practice. Shift the weight back, keep the neck straight, ask for the step. And the reason a horse finds one way harder than the other is horses are like us. They prefer to put more weight on one leg. Yeah, we all have a favourite leg. If you kind of have a little go after the webinar of practicing standing on one leg, you'll find that on one leg you won't like standing on it for so long as the other leg. And horses are just the same. Horses have a leg they like to keep their weight on. And so the leg they like to keep their weight on, they'll like to move the opposite leg in the foreleg abduction. Orient prefers moving the right leg, which is why we filmed this, so it's a really big step for you. He would, unless we practice, would like to take just a slightly smaller step to the left. So there's a lot of detail you're watching when you train this. So those of you who may have done some of the Andrew works, I know some of my clients are on this webinar, once you can do the step, then you're looking for the nuances. Does my horse do this off a light signal? Does my horse do this without the whip? Does my horse take an equal step both ways? So you can, the better you get this and the more symmetrical you get this, the less problem you'll have when you start doing the fancy stuff. Also notice when you've done this, when you ride, what happens on the way you find easier to do this on the ground will be the way it's easier to turn when you're riding. And that gives you a lot of information. Okay, so next slide, which I think is everybody thoroughly confused and do they have any questions? So we could move on to the next one. So does anybody have any questions so far?
Yeah, any questions, folks? And if you have any questions at all, doesn't matter, large or small, relating to your horse or pony, then please put them in the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom. If you hover at the bottom, it should show you a Q&A button. Tap away in there.
Anything so far?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's one there. Can I do this in a cavesson?
Yes, you can do it in anything you want to do this in, any of this groundwork, and I talk about that in the first webinar. Yeah, you can do it in cavessons, head collars, bitless bridles, whatever you want to do it in. And you'll find if you do it in your bridle, it will then work in your head collar, so that you can again do this when you're not actually in the arena or doing a training session. You can do it on the yard. So yeah.
Great stuff. That's it for now, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's understood me.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, we'll keep going. Okay.
Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. Okay. So now we start to move on to the fancy stuff. And this is side pass. I briefly touched on this earlier. This is often this is what's used a lot in Western riding. We don't actually have it in the sort of English or classical riding, but it's a really important thing to be able to do with your horse. I sometimes talk about it as leg yield in halt, because it's really important that your horse can go sideways without any forward in it. So the horse understands what sideways is before you start confusing your horse with let's go forwards and sideways. Because if they haven't deeply and clearly learned sideways, what tends to happen is a bit of a wrestling match. You start asking for leg yield and you're spending a lot of time trying to not let your horse rush forward. Because remember, horses are flight animals. So if they're confused about what you want them to do, they tend to go faster. And they don't have to do it dramatically, they might just speed up. And so then the in-hand you're trying to do becomes really heavy and a little bit of a wrestling match and hanging on. So I always think it's really important that a horse learns to go sideways in halt without any forwards in it. So what we're doing here is putting together sideways the front legs and the back legs at the same time. And we're asking Orient to walk purely sideways. So there's no forward in this at all. And the way that we're doing it is the whip is asking for the hind leg, so the little push on the hind leg you saw earlier, and then the rein is asking for the front leg. If you need to, you can always quickly flip the whip forward to tap a shoulder, but this always works best if you've already got the horse understanding the rein for the foreleg abduction really clearly. Again, when you do this, what you're looking for is that the horse stays straight, so parallel to the side of the arena or wherever you're doing it. If you haven't got both your front and your hind legs steps very light and clear, what will often happen is the horse will try and charge through the shoulder. So it's really important that you get those clear first. It's also really important, again, we were talking about this earlier, that the horse doesn't just charge sideways. So you get some horses, Orient is one of these, that as soon as they think there might be a bit of going on, he'll have gone from one side of the arena to the other without anybody actually giving him any signal, which might look quite flash, but actually isn't of any use at all when you want the horse to do precise work, which is what lateral work is. So we want the horse to do this slowly, but in a flowing way. And you see him here clearly taking a front leg, clearly taking a hind leg. Don't do it for too long. It's actually really hard work for the horse, the amount they have to engage their core, their tummy muscles, and the amount they have to cross under, shift their weight back to do it. So once you've done a few of them, you'll find that's quite enough. It's much harder to go just sideways than it is to actually go sideways and forward. So if we move on to the next slide, this is also side pass, but we're using a different horse here. So this is Orient I'm using here, and now we're using a cob called Snowy. Snowy is half a Clydesdale. She hasn't been doing this for so long, and so you see this not going a little bit harder. So Snowy's saying, oh, this is quite hard work. What she'd like to do is disappear out through her shoulder. You see her moving her head towards the handler, wanting to go through her shoulder instead of taking her weight back onto her hind leg. And then she understands and does take her weight back. So I put this in to show that it's not always going to just flow smoothly. Snowy also tries to put her head up a little bit to say, hey, this is quite a hard thing to do, before she then accepts what we want. Also, this shows that you can do this with any type of horse. She is quite a heavy cob, and she can do this really easily once she understands what you want her to do. And just again, doing it slowly, so step by step, so that your horse isn't rushing across. So those are the two side passes. We're also looking again for symmetry. So we're using two different horses, so you won't see symmetry in this, but you're looking with your horse. Notice when you do it, is one way particularly harder? Do you really struggle one way to keep your horse straight and not go through the shoulder? If you do, go back to the single steps and you'll discover that, yes, actually one of the hind leg yields is still taking more taps than the other, not such a big step, stuff like that. Or one of the forelimb abduction steps, the horse is bending its neck, putting its head up, whatever, and you need to go back to the single steps. Any problem you have in a sideways movement can be traced back to the single steps. So that makes it, I always think, quite easy to troubleshoot yourself without someone there and go, oh yes, it's because I still can't do one of the hind legs very easily. So that's your side pass. And then we move on to what people will recognize as a classical thing to do in hand, which is the leg yield. And you can think of leg yield, once you can do side pass, as side pass in walk, because basically you're asking the same thing, the hind leg and the front leg, but you're doing it in walk. So the way you would start this is ask your horse to start walking forwards fairly slowly to start with, and then start adding in hind leg and front leg. And you can see we have the push for the hind leg, we have the rein, which you can't see very well from this angle, for the front leg, and the horse goes over. Now, what you need to watch, so troubleshooting on this is, if the horse tries to, again, charge through the shoulders should be just a very tiny bit in advance. You see this with Orient. But for practice, you should aim for keeping your horse straight. If you aim for your horse to be straight, so parallel to the fence, you'll end up with what we see here, which is the correct leg yield, which is very slightly shoulder in advance, very slightly horse bent away, his neck bent away from the direction of movement. If you aim for straight, that's what you'll get. If you aim for through the shoulder and a little bit of bend, you'll end up with a charge over jackknife. So aim for straightness. The other thing to really think about is whatever speed you are walking at before you begin is the speed you should continue at. So what I mean by that is you're walking on fairly slowly, then you ask the horse to go sideways. If they start speeding up, That's because they're trying to answer your sideways question with walk forward. Now, they may be doing that because they don't clearly understand your sideways signals yet. They may be doing it because they're saying, well, actually, walking forwards would be easier. So is this okay? So Orient is very trained in this. If I have a new person doing a session with him, he will try to tell them he's never heard leg yield, and he will just try and walk forward until that person can say to him, no, you don't speed up in walk. And then he miraculously remembers what the sideways cues are. So horses will always try and do the easiest option. They don't know it makes them a better horse if they can go sideways, because it doesn't. It's just harder work for them. So I think we've also got a clip of Snowy doing some some leg yield as well. No, we've got Orient doing the other way. So here we have Orient doing the other direction. And again, we're looking for symmetry. You'll find that one way always, just feels that little bit harder. You have to maybe work harder for it to be symmetrical. Again, it may be that you struggle to have it symmetrical, in which case you would then need to go back to the single signals, work out what's going wrong. Maybe you've just got to put a little bit of a whoa, a little bit of a stop in there as well, so the horse does it slowly. The other thing that some horses do is, as you ask them to go sideways, they stop and try and go sideways. So they basically stop and try and do side pass. In those horses, you need to ask them to go forwards a little more. So we have to add in the forward cue on the rein as well as the sideways. That's slightly less common, because to go sideways without walking forwards is actually harder. So that's a bit of a confused horse. But if you just remember what we want the horse to do is walk, is that same rhythm of walk whilst you add in the sideways cues, you won't go far wrong on that. Now, I think we do have Snowy on a third one. I think we have Snowy here. So this is Snowy just learning leg yield. And you'll see she goes over. She would still like to, if she could, you can see she's a little bit more crooked than Orient. I deliberately put some slides in of it not going quite so well in order for you to see what can happen. So she wants to a little bit go on the shoulder. So we have to give a little bit more of a tap on the hind leg. She's not really swishing her tail quite as much as it looks. It was actually blowing an absolute gale when we did this, and her tail was just going off in the wind as much as the tap. She's also giving a little bit of a swish because we're asking her to step her hind leg a little bit more than she thinks is needed for this exercise. So the horses, the heavier horses like Snowy, they're not so well designed for sideways as the horses like Orient, the Lusitanos, who have so much genetics on sideways movement. So they have to work a little bit harder, but it makes it even more important to do this with them, because it's improving her posture, improving her suppleness so much to be able to do this, and improving her straightness. Okay, so they're all your leg yields. So then we get to move on to some more fancy stuff, the shoulder in. Now, the shoulder in is often what you see people doing when they're doing the more classical in-hand work. And it's a great exercise to do. It's often harder than you think. So when you're doing this, again, we're combining the front and the back legs. So if we had the world's perfect horse that was absolutely straight and didn't ever have any in its own thoughts, you'd just be asking the horse, you'd have the horse straight on the track. You'd then ask the horse to bring its shoulder off and then to proceed up the track. Now, back in the real world of horses, that isn't what happens. So you ask the horse off with the shoulder, and they will say, well, it'll be actually much easier to bring our quarters in as well. So as you see here, our handler is using her whip on the quarter, because she's basically saying, can we keep the quarters on the track? So she's asking for almost a yield step, which is sort of saying, no, don't step in, step out, so that the horse's hind legs proceed up the track. And shoulder in is what we call a 3-track movement. So if you're looking at the horse as they do it, you can see 3 legs. So one foreleg and a hind leg and another hind leg. In more modern dressage, when you're competing, your horse needs to actually be on 3.5 tracks. And you see, this is Neo, my Lipizzaner here. You'll see him doing this sometimes on a 3-track, sometimes on a 3.5. The reason you have 3.5 in competition is because where the judge is situated on the centre line, they can't see the angle clearly enough if you're on 3, and you will be marked down. So everyone knows to do it on 3.5 tracks. Troubleshooting for this. We've already talked about they want to move their hind leg in. The other thing a horse would do is they would like to bend their neck too much towards the handler. So for shoulder in, they should have a little bit of flexion towards the handler. So this is at the moment flexion to the left. And you only want the flexion, so the bend, the horse's nose shouldn't go beyond their point of shoulder. And if their nose does this, goes beyond the point of shoulder, they're again just jackknifing and diving on the shoulder. Often this is also accompanied by the horse speeding up and you having to speed up to keep up with them, which we do not want. So you might need to think in one direction with your horse, that you've actually got to not bend its neck or not have any neck bend in order to control the shoulder. So you have to notice that when you're practicing. It's all about noticing and kind of going, oh, the hind leg comes off, oh dear, the neck's bending too much, and just making little adjustments. So this is really a combination again of hind leg, front leg, probably a bit of go, maybe a bit of woe as you do it. And we have a second slide of the shoulder in here, going in the other direction. Again, this is Neo. Now in this direction, if you watch, he actually slightly drifts forward. So he starts with his hind legs on the track and he ends up with his hind legs slightly in. So this is the way that his whole body coming slightly across the skull. So this is the way that he finds harder. He's not so keen on keeping his weight back on his hind legs. So as we do this, the correction for this, which I deliberately didn't correct, is that you need a little bit of a back on your rein to keep the horse back on the track. And I also always think this is such a good thing to practice along a fence. So if you're doing this in an arena, do it along the track of the arena with the fence. If you're doing it in a field, either do it along the fence in the field or put a line of poles out to do it along, because Neo is only drifting in a very small amount here. If you didn't have the fence line, you wouldn't notice it, but it's huge. He is making this much easier for himself by not keeping his weight back on his hind leg. And they call shoulder in, you know, the most important, the mother of all movements, because when a horse does shoulder in correctly, they really have to bring their hind quarter under and sit on their hind quarters, which means they really lighten the forehand. So Neo's managing to make this not quite as hard as it should be. In the other direction, he was staying very clearly on the track because he finds that one easier. So that's something to bear in mind. When you're practicing, it can be really useful if you don't have something flash like a Pivo, to just pop your mobile phone or your iPad on the fence, so you can actually watch yourself record yourself coming towards, and then play it back afterwards. And then you're like, oh, I was actually drifting forwards. Oh gosh, look how much my horse is bending its neck and diving onto the shoulder. So they're all things you can really analyze once you're watching it back, in the way that if you watch this video 100 times, you can start to notice all sorts of different things. So that's a great little tip. Okay, so I think that's all of the shoulder ins. Now we move on to we're just sort of stopping on the flash stuff of shouldering in and leg yielding, and we're going back to a single movement. And the single movement we're looking for here is again the hind leg yield, but we're doing it towards you. Now again, this is Neo doing this, and he's making it look amazingly easy. The cue for this is put your hand up. So when the horse knows how to do it properly, you lift your hand, the horse moves. When you're teaching a horse this, and Neo, we're doing a little bit of a touch so you can see it. You lift your hand, nothing happens, you give the horse a little tap. Now, this can be really hard because this is the first time in any of this groundwork method that we are asking the horse to step towards the handler. So often the horse is like, no, we have to always move away. So they will keep trying to move away from you. In some systems, this is called drawing the horse towards you. And as we progress with this system, which we're not doing tonight, we start to think about how we could energetically draw the horse with our body. But first, they have to learn this. So he's moving as Minette touches his left hind leg, he's crossing his left hind leg under and stepping his hind quarter across. So if your horse finds this difficult, when you first ask them, so we've learned in my previous webinar that horses learn by trialing behaviors. So moving their quarters towards you is probably, when you first go to ask, the movement the horse would least think of making. They will probably keep trying to move their quarters away from you. So to make the answer that you want the easiest answer, as you ask them, move their head away from you. So with the rein, push their head away. In order to make it real, that makes it very hard for the horse to move its quarters away from you. So they will probably, they will eventually come up with the idea that they have to move their quarters towards you. And the moment they move, take the whip off. So to start with, even if they only take a half a step, even if they only sway their quarters towards you, release. Because once the horse has got the idea of this, then they will easily learn and do it in the way Neo's doing it now. But it can often take a little bit of training. Sometimes people train this to do it by putting the horse by the fence. So the only way they can do it is to move away from the fence. I find this doesn't work so well because often the horse seems to associate the fact the fence is there rather than with the cue. So I always do it with pushing the head away and then moving the quarters towards me. So the reason we want to ask the horse to move its quarters towards you, I'm going to digress slightly from lateral work in a moment because we're going to use this to mount. Now, this is often something that people are so impressed when you can go up to a mounting block, stand on the mounting block, and your horse moves itself in position for mounting. And there's loads of different ways you can train this. The way I train it is the way we're doing now, but it's such a powerful thing to do. And if we move on to the next slide, we're going to show you now actually how we do it. So we have Snowy here, the cob with the big bottom. And so I go up onto the block. I just take her up any old how. I lift up my hand. She starts to come towards. She then became distracted. So she got a little tap on the bottom. And so you see her in slow motion in this video, moving her quarters towards, ready for mounting. You also see that she then stands completely still. So by teaching your horse to present itself to the mounting block, to move its own quarters towards you, what happens is they just start to go, oh yeah, that's what we do. There's no confusion. There's no, I need to have my horse mounting block between the fence and my horse pin it between the fence and the mounting block. There's no needing people to hold the horse, to feed it treats while you can get on. There's nothing like that. The horse just clearly understands what you want it to do. And all my horses, I can take them to the block, I can stand and I can put my hand up. And occasionally, if they're distracted by something, a little tap to say, can you bring your quarters? And they'll all do this. And Snowy, in particular, was a very difficult horse when she was first backed. She was very easy to back. She then developed a real issue with mounting. What she learned, and this is something that I think some of you will probably all be able to go, oh yes, that's happened to me. She learned that if she came to the block and parked, and then she quietly moved her quarters away, I would have to get down, go round, position her again, go back up the block. She thought this was the best game that had ever happened. And so I used to have people to pin her down. And then I discovered this method and never looked back, just brings herself to the block. So you probably all identify with the horse that, get it lined up, get yourself organised, go to put your foot in the stirrup, horse moves its bottom away. You have to get down, bring the horse again and start all over again. And that horse has learned that it gets released from being mounted and then being ridden and doing any hard work by the fact it moves its quarters and you have to go round and position it again. Teaching your horse this is just completely life-changing. It also means you don't have need anybody to help you when you get on. They will just do this every time in any situation. So hopefully that has all been really clear to you. So we can move on to the next slide now, having done my digression into my little lecture for the day. And then this is why for lateral work, we need to have quarters towards. So this movement is known as travers. I remember it by, if you think travers is T and that's tail inwards. In this movement, the horse is again on 3.5, 4 track, or even on 4 tracks for travers. And they move their quarters towards you from the hand up, which isn't showing actually that clearly in the video. And as they move their quarters in, their front end has to stay on the track, and they have slight bend, so slight left bend, in order to be looking clearly up the track. Now, this can be quite a difficult movement to train, and I deliberately put in one where Neo here is doing it, trying to straighten himself, doing it, straightening himself, so that you can see the corrections. You're just constantly asking for the quarters to come in whilst walking really slowly. And because this video is in slow motion, you don't actually see that what Neo's trying to do is every time he straightens himself, it's because he's sped up. So he says, it's really hard to do travers. How about I walk faster and then I will straighten myself automatically? And so constantly I'm having to say to him, no, you're going to slow down. And as you slow down, then he'll move his quarters in again. So it's quite a tricky maneuver to do. And I think we have more than one of this slide. I think we have a second slide in a moment. Do we have a, yes, we do. And here we have Neo doing it in the other direction. Now, he finds this harder. He's not so keen on bending his neck to the right. And so I was allowing him to kind of do the wrong bend to show you here. He would like to do this without the neck bend. And when you do this with your horses at home, you will probably see that on one rein, you can't get them to bend their neck. And what will happen to you is either a straight neck, like you see in Neo, or more likely them trying to put their necks in the other direction. So on this slide to the left, and then they will try and bring their forelegs in, and that will result in you having to move away because they're going to tread on you. I couldn't actually get one of my horses to kind of quite do it like that. This is the best I could manage to get them to do badly. But often horses will put their head out and then they'll jackknife, so they'll throw their shoulder in. So you have to really work on asking them to bend their neck a little bit as you ask them to bring their quarters in, and you might need to again flip your whip forward to say no, and it's not your shoulder towards me. It's also really important that you don't move, as in you don't step away. If you watch me, I'm walking a straight line. As he goes to walk towards me, I don't step away, because horses are very good, because this is what they do in the field, they're very good at saying, oh, if I move in, you'll move away, and then I don't have to do the harder movement. So really notice that. You may, again, video yourself if it's not going so well, and then you'll start to notice, oh yes, look, my horse moved and I moved away. Or notice my horse speeds up. So the horse is answering your sideways questions with walk faster. And all of the slides I've shown you, I've done this in an order of difficulty. So we started with just doing individual things. We then moved on to side pass. We then moved on to leg yield. We then moved onto shoulder in, and we've just done travers. If you have trouble with one movement, don't move on to the next one, because it will only get harder for you. And if you think, oh, I'll just have a go at the next one, by not being able to do it, the horse will be learning how not to do it. And we don't want that. So always make sure you've trained each thing before you move on to the next thing. And by training it, I don't mean, oh yeah, if I give loads and loads of taps to my horse and really heavy rein, my horse will do this. Does your horse do this off one light tap? Does your horse do this off one light rein aid? Once they do, move on to the next thing, but don't move on too quickly. And we've only progressed as far as travers this evening. Obviously, there are other movements as well, but I thought that was plenty for everybody to try and get their head round for the first time. So I guess we've got loads of questions probably now.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ali. That was brilliant. And I've got, I'm going to have to watch again to make sure I've got the order
Yeah,
right.
you do need to watch it quite a few
Yeah,
times.
definitely.
Yeah.
We
I'm
had
gonna
a
stop.
comment.
Oh, sorry, I'm just going to stop share so that we can see more of faces just before
Yeah.
you start grabbing questions. Okay.
So we had a comment from Ina early when you were talking about side pass, and she says that we do side pass in Trec. So
yes, you do.
You do.
And and also in working equitation.
Ah.
So one of the things that Orient does, and I was saying that Orient likes to go side pass very fast, is he we did in his youth a lot of working equitation, and they have to canter sideways. So when I first had him, if you ever put on a sideways aid, he just shot sideways in canter because he'd done so much working equitation. Yeah. And I did quite a lot of Trek at one point, actually, when I first had Orient, and they used to do sideways over poles, along poles, and all sorts of things. And if you train like this, you'll suddenly find a lot of the Trek obstacles become a lot easier. I have quite a lot of Trek clients who do it, and because sometimes in Trek it's not always that clearly trained, so it's really good if you can train that, because you get extra marks for the horse doing it in a nice rhythm and looking like it's easy. So brilliant. This way you'll get it really easy.
Top tips.
Yeah, top tip.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Guys, just keep typing your questions as well as we go.
Yeah, there's one from Claire here. In Travers quarter in, there is bend in the neck.
Yeah.
In shoulder in, and this is a question mark at the end. In shoulder in, there is no neck bend?
No, there is neck bend. So there should be neck bend away from the direction the horse is going. Okay. So if you're doing shoulder in, and the horse is going up the track to the right, if the horse is going up the track to the right, their neck will be bent a little bit to the left.
Yeah. Right. So with shoulder in, your bend is similar to leg yield. And it's is that right? Yeah, you could kind of say that. And if you really want to confuse yourselves, you could think that actually travers and shoulder in are the same thing. Yeah. So in shoulder in here, we can see the he's moving to the right, but his neck is slightly bent left. Yeah.
Yeah. If you just twizzled him around, he'd be doing travers.
Yeah.
Yeah. That blows my mind. But some people teach that. Yeah. I can never quite get my head around it, but it's just how my brain works. Now, when he's doing shoulder in this way, you only just have a tiny bit of bend. Yeah. And the reason for this is that he doesn't like bending his neck so much in that direction. So he's not so keen on right bend. So he's trying to not do quite the right amount. Yeah. Yeah. So I think I said this this way round. We have to be really careful he doesn't do too much bend, because Neo would like to screw his neck round and charge up the track. And this is what all horses do. Yeah. So we deliberately filmed this, showing that the horses what they would do a little bit, wrong. So that this is what you're going to have. In one direction, you're going to find your horse bends its neck and charges up the track, which hopefully you won't think is shoulder in, and you'll need to really slow down. And in the other direction, you'll find you probably have to actually put in a little bit of the neck bend. Does that make sense? Yeah. And it's all to do with the horse's natural asymmetry and the way they're left-sided and right-sided. And so we're trying to make each shoulder in, each travers mirror images, but you have to often do different things to make them mirror images. Yes. And that's really when lateral work improves the horse. Otherwise, you're doing the lateral work in the horse's pattern. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. So the horse that likes to bend its neck wildly right and charge left out through its left shoulder, if that's what you kind of allow to happen, then you're just practicing what they like to do. Time. But you often see that. I mean, I will see client, start teaching somebody and they'll say, "Oh, we can do shoulder," and I say, "Well, show me that then." And in one direction they can barely do it, and in the other direction they're charging up the long side out through the shoulder. Yeah. So it's really noticing, and that's why it can be so useful to just use your pivot or stick your iPad on the fence, which can be so useful when you're doing lateral, because you can just go up and down the same long side, the same bit of fence, do it one way, do it the other way, and then watch it back, and then you'll start to notice, oh dear.
Because
Yeah.
when you're in the moment, you're trying to concentrate. It's very hard to.
And horses can really
Yeah.
confuse us, especially when they speed up, because
Yeah.
you're desperately trying to do it. And then it's really good to watch it back on your phone or your iPad and then go, oh, now I can really see what happens.
Yeah.
And then you can then work out from the toolkit of, did my horse speed up? Did my horse slow down? Did my horse not move its hind leg? Did it not move its front leg? By training that again, you can fix it. Which is what I think makes this such an easy way of training it. Whereas often when you watch some of the more sort of classical ways of teaching this, and Orient has done a lot of the classical Portuguese ways, you kind of see it happening. It looks really beautiful, but then you go to do it and think, okay, so that's not quite the same when I do it. What do I do? Yeah. And it's because the person doing it has got real great skill of timing and all the nuances, and they basically can just do it. Whereas we need to be able to start it from the beginning, don't we, and troubleshoot and go, this is what you do when that doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Talking of which, what two questions sort of linked to age. What age should you start doing sideways in terms of maturity for the horse? And then the other question is, how long should you expect to take it to train, I guess age-wise as well? So maybe
so age-wise in terms of when you would start it, yeah, right. I mean, my whole groundwork system, you would start doing with a foal. Yeah, so that they start to stop and go and park, because basically the moment you start handling a foal, you are teaching pressure and release, and you are teaching whatever you release for. Yeah, which if you don't have an idea of what you're doing, that foal starts to develop habits very quickly. Yeah, and so you really want to start as soon as they have a little head collar on them, doing all of my basic stuff, and then starting to learn to take the basic hind leg step, the basic front leg step. Yeah, right from when they're tiny. But that's all you do. 1 step, 2 steps, because you need to be really careful of until their growth plates are all shut and everything else. But then as they start to do a little bit more work, then you would start to do a little bit more with them. Yeah. And it's not so much what you do, it's how much of it you do.
Okay.
Yeah. So a horse that is only 3 and is doing groundwork before it's being backed, there's nothing wrong with it doing a few steps of shoulder in. Yeah. But there'd be a lot wrong with doing lots and lots and lots of shoulder in. And or lots and lots of side parts. So it's really good that the horse understands the signals, but you don't want to do too much of it.
Yeah.
Because it's about too much strain on one repetitive thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And the other question was, roughly how long would you expect it to take to train a horse really to go through all of the things we've seen tonight? Is that
okay?
So
it depends a little bit on the horse. So I always say that there are the horses learning lateral working with a horse. Horses either kind of just get it or they don't get it. And for me, it's a bit like learning maths. You either just get maths at school or you really have to think about maths. Yeah. And horses, I see that with lateral work. Yeah. They either kind of go, yeah, lateral work, great. We really understand how to do lateral. Not they understand how to do it, but yeah, that makes sense. We can do it. And they pick it up really quickly. And there's others who, you might spend an entire several sessions getting them to see why they might want to step their hind leg sideways. Yeah. Because they just go, we don't get that. And then once they get it, they're okay, but they're always going to have to think about it more than the horse that just goes, yeah, sideways, we can really do that. Yeah. So how long in that way, it depends on your horse. And then how long it takes to train everything we've seen tonight. It depends how good you are at training it to start with. But normally I would in one session train the hind leg. If I'm doing my groundwork stuff of the stop, go and back and everything else, as soon as the horse has got to the stage of knowing all those basics, I will start introducing, can we do the hind leg in each direction? Yeah. And then once the horse, I don't teach hind leg and front leg in the same session because it's just too much brain space.
Yeah.
So one day you do that, and then you can do it. Sometimes I have people come and train with me for a week or something, and they want to learn groundwork sideways. So the day 1 we do the hind leg, day 2 we do the front leg. If they've got that on day 3, we'll probably start side pass. Yeah, if they've got that, day 4 we're going to do leg yield. But that's also going to be me probably taking the horse off the person, helping the horse do it, give it back to the person. So how long it takes you depends a little bit on how good your release is, things like that. So yeah, so you can't really say exactly how long it's going to take.
Yeah,
but it's progressive. As soon as you can do one, do the next one.
Yeah. So
and then
yeah,
being able to do it is different to being able to do it well. Yeah, so yes, your horse can learn hind leg yield, just taking the hind leg in one session, but do they always do it off a light touch of the whip, or do they sometimes do one step and sometimes do three, and sometimes you've got to tap for 10 times before they do it? So it can take a while to do it really well.
Yeah.
So, and just depend, and also it depends on how, I think, committed you are in terms of, are you someone who's always in the arena, or someone who always, before they ride, even if they're going on a hack outside their stable, do a bit, or someone who does it once a week. So
yeah,
it's tricky.
I have a question. I was going to ask about fitness of the horse, and linking this with Ina's question. Am I okay to do this with a horse with hock arthritis? So this may be a similar answer to it's how much you do again, but
again, it's how much you do. And it's also a little bit, you have to read your horse. So a horse that has some sort of type of hock arthritis or some type of arthritis actually are better doing it a bit, because you need to get that hock to move. It's a bit like people who have arthritis. If they just sit in a chair all day, they get a lot stiffer. But if they actually do some movement, it helps the arthritis. But if you do too much, it's going to probably aggravate the arthritis. So it's trying to do a bit without doing too much. And you've got to read your horse. If your horse is, first of all, says it's a bit hard and then it gets easier, great, keep doing it. If your horse starts to then get a little bit difficult about it, they're telling you that's too much. And also, it's not just the crossing of the legs, it's also the way they have to shift their weight back, so they're putting more weight. But it depends entirely on the horse as to how much they should do. The same applies to horses that have had suspensory issues, because again, those horses have got to get there when you're going sideways, they've got to shift the hind leg under, so they're putting more strain on the suspensories. It again depends on how bad the suspensory was, how well it's been rehabbed, and just reading your horse. It's so hard to read a horse as to, are they finding this difficult because they haven't quite got the idea yet, or are they saying, actually this really bothers my leg when you do this? So you've got to read the horse, I think.
Keep tapping in questions, folks, if you think of anything. One more from me. You mentioned, and I think I read somewhere that Russell Guire is either doing some research or just done some research on sort of the left and right-handedness of horses. When you mentioned that, and they're always going to have a sort of a better side than another. Should you do a little bit more on the side they find more difficult to try and encourage more?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there is, I think, quite a lot goes on about the whole left-sidedness and right-sidedness of horses, and there's loads of different ways to think about it, but basically all horses do like to have their necks bent one way, and the reason they bend their neck one way is so that they can put more weight on the opposite leg. So if the horse bends his neck left, it's to weight their right leg, and that is actually the most common. So the most common leg that the horse likes to stand on is the right leg, because they like to bend left, because horses like to carry their rib cages to the right, and that's something like 80% of horses. And there is research going on, and there's often arguments go on about, because people are the same, people also tend to slide right and carry their rib cages right, and so there's often debate on, have people made horses like that, or is it the horses were like that, and that's how it is. It's the biggest thing I see in riding asymmetry, because obviously that's my other specialist subject, is people slide right. But do they slide right because the horse is throwing his ribcage right, so that's where you go, or why?
I don't think just this weekend, and I thought, well, there I go again.
Well, to the right. It's really unusual for a person to go left. I had someone go left the other day, and I tell you, it's the first time for I don't know how long everybody's horse was his head left and his ribcage or shoulders right. Every person in the world.
I can't even remember. We went on the mechanical horse, didn't we? And I can't actually remember which way I went. I probably went the predictable
And you
way.
often don't slide as badly on the mechanical horse because the mechanical horse is straight.
Yeah.
The mechanical horse can't move its rib cage, whereas you sit
Yeah.
on your horse that you've been riding for however long. Yeah, that horse goes, oh yeah, I put my rib cage right, and come on, mummy, whoa, and off we all go. And then we all say, you know, our saddle goes right, and and our horse is heavier on our left rein because we're hanging on the left rein to stop ourselves disappearing right.
Yes.
For another webinar. So you see in horses, and that's mostly what they do, and you do want to try any lateral work that makes the horse move its rib cage the way it doesn't want to move it. Because lateral work was invented for straightness. And that gets lost in translation. People are busy making their horse bend all over the place and not notice how actually in one direction the horse is just bending more the way they want to go, so just getting more crooked. And lateral work was all devised to make a horse straight.
Interesting, really interesting. I've got a question from you. Talked at the beginning, about moving the horse's quarters over from a tap. I had a couple of liberty lessons, and I don't need the tap. I just hold she just moves across. How do you?
And what signal does she move from? Your body?
Just from moving my arm towards her quarters. Towards her quarters. But she does go a little bit, let's keep going at this. So how do you control the number of steps?
So the way I think of this is you first need, so all of the stuff I did in the first webinar and in this webinar, this is like the ABCs. I love it. This is the ABCs, and you first should try and teach this and then move on to the liberty. So I will teach my horses will actually do move away from the body, but they have first learned to do it from the tap, because you want this to relate into rhythm work. Because when you're riding, how is she going to understand the sideways signal unless you lean over and wave your hands at her from the side? And horses move so much on the liberty work from your energy, your intention, and just where you position your body, which is so nice to do. So, but also with the liberty work, unless you are really skilled at it, you will not be able to control how many steps, which is what you're finding. So you just need to, and I've trained quite a lot of people who have done a lot of Pirelli and stuff, and so their horses move from their bodies. You just have to go back and teach them to move not from your body. And the way you can do it, because I played around with this quite a lot at one point, was it's your thought, it's your intention. So if you walk up to the side, I don't know if you did some of the stuff in my first webinar on park, you basically got to go back to do park. So you can walk all around your horse, and when you're doing it, you're really thinking, my horse is parked. And then when you want to do your liberty, you're walking towards her hind end thinking, and your quarters will move. And they absolutely will do that. So to do the hind leg, you've got to go, my horse will park while I can stand in that position. My horse will let me stroke with the whip there, and then you'll be able to push with the whip. Then you'll be able to do the step back for the halt, so she only does one step.
It's back to my childhood, where I always thought that horses could read my mind.
Horses do, and I think it's not so much they read their mind, it's your energetics. It's your energetics of your body. This is what they read, but it's good to think it. So but I always think it'd be in the ideal world, we would teach our horses this stuff and then move on to the liberty stuff. And so often people have done it a different way, because some of the other groundwork natural horsemanship systems do it that way, as well. And it's just doing a different thing. Liberty is different. How much better can my riding of lateral work be? So many things to play with, and you kind of have to say, right, okay, which ones am I going to do? Because otherwise poor horses are going to be, oh, she's had another webinar. She's had another webinar. I love that.
Ours are particularly confused because I'm trying to use clicks for clicker training and trying to use a different noise for energy and liberty. And
So I mean, the clicker, I use clicker. Obviously, we've taken the sound off there, and those horses were all trained. But I use clicker a lot with the stuff I do. So when I'm first training any of those movements, the moment the horse takes the step, when it's a new one, they get a click and a treat.
Yeah.
And certainly the cob, Snowy, she's the horse that got me into clicker training, because I had her from when she was a baby.
Yeah.
And she is completely bomb-proof. She is so bomb-proof that when I first went up and went to give, because I'd learned some of the Andrew stuff, and when I first went to give her a tap, she just went, "You're tapping. Excellent, just keep tapping." And literally you could have got into some really bad tapping, and she just stands there going, "And?" Yeah, and she just wouldn't move, wouldn't do a single thing. She just stand there. So I then got into clicker because she's really food orientated, and she's the lightest horse to handle. It's because of her clicking.
Oh, well, that's an interesting, perhaps one more question, because that's quite interesting, because I've got a baby gypsy cob, and he's reacting similarly to the light taps, because I was practicing after your last webinar, I was practicing the tap, 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 tap to get them to step back and then, you know, release the pressure.
Yeah.
And you were very clear on this isn't a, come on, move back. It's just a light nagging.
Yeah.
And he was just like, all right, Mum, what are you up to?
Yeah, that's exactly what Snowy did. But that's what Snowy's like in life, because when I first had Snowy, the smaller grey horse, Neo, Lipizzaner, he didn't like her much. And he used to go over and double barrel her, and she would stand there while he did it. And just look at him as much say, "Did something touch me?" Yeah, literally nothing bothered Snowy. So no pressure was ever going to bother her, which makes her very safe, but it wasn't going to make her a horse you could really ride or do anything with, and without having to chase her and do not horrible things too. So, but clicker, she's so light, because the moment I did clicker with her, she went excellent. So she just, and it made her really understand how to learn. So that she, as soon as you go to teach her a new thing, she's like, right, so I'll just pay attention. Oh, yes, so there's the little tap. As soon as I do it, get the click. Yeah, that's what I do. You never have to do a lot with her now.
So that could be a progression if people have got horses that are just very tolerant of the tapping then.
Yeah, horses that are really basically, and I would say some people are like that. Some people you have to shout at them before they really take any notice. Other people, you only have to whisper and they still look scared. So, you know, it's exactly the same with horses. Horses, dogs, it's all the same. And clicker is so good with horses that are just very laid back and just go, yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
You know.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I must say that after Heidi's husband, Chris, who you got a quick introduction to there,
that was excellent.
He's coming with your tea. I think he'd forgotten you were doing this, hadn't he? And Ina put in the question, she thought that was really funny. So welcome to Heidi's husband, Chris. Yeah,
he's going to be in a lot of trouble later, isn't he?
He is, isn't he? Yeah. He actually just sent me a message saying, "You better tell everybody I ate your tea."
I actually thought that for a man, he did a really good job of realising and leaving.
And exiting.
Yeah, he did. There wasn't a big kind of, you know. Yeah.
Oh, Anna's just said, just want to say thank you for a great webinar. Yes, it was spectacular, Ali. Again, thank you so much. Really clear, really usable content. Thank you.
Okay. And brilliant. If anyone wants to know, is really into this groundwork, Dressage Training TV, they have my entire groundwork system, which actually goes right up to half pass, pirouettes, so all the tricky, even trickier stuff. So Dressage Training TV has got all of that on there.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, and a reminder again, they can find you on Facebook and they can find you on your website as well, can't they, Ali? So
they can, yeah. And I'll be back in January again, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to that.
And until then, there's 3 coming up soon, folks, just to let you know. So next week, we've got Charlotte Berridge from Smart Saddles. And if you're curious about treeless flexible saddles, this is the webinar for you. She's going to talk about how fully flexible technology has progressed over the years. So come along, ask her questions and find out more. We've then got Louise Moferon-Vernet. My French accent isn't very good, I'm afraid, but her English is superb. She's an equine osteopath, and she's going to talk about understanding and, importantly, preventing back pain in your horse. Really, really interesting. And then we have the wonderful, I'm sure most people have heard of Gillian Higgins from Horses Inside Out. She's not painting horses live, I'm afraid, but this is an evening with Gillian, and you can send your questions in advance, and she's going to answer questions about horse physiology, live and tell us a bit about herself that evening. So that's what's coming up. And that remains for us to, again, just say a huge thank you to you, Ali.
Thank you.
And Claire's just said she'll be in the arena with it tomorrow. So she's ready for practicing. So
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if
brilliant.
anyone has any, they get in a muddle, any questions, you can always just contact me via my website or my Facebook or whatever, and I'll see what I can do to help you.
And you do regular clinics and camps as well, don't you? Probably not.
Yeah, I do. So down at my base in Suffolk, I run camps, 2-day and 3-day camps, where people come and learn this stuff, the groundwork stuff, and also all the ridden stuff are divided by mechanics, etc. Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, so check those out, everybody. Have we got any more comments coming in there? Oh, yes. Yeah, Claire's in the arena. Sorry, yeah. Ali, Ina says thank you, Ali. And,
thank you.
Oh, and Ina's trialing a smart saddle at the end of the month. Oh, how exciting.
Oh, she'll like next week then.
Come along next week as well and find out some of the detail behind it. Wonderful. Well, we look forward to seeing you all soon. Remember, there's a very short questionnaire at the end, just a little tiny survey, really helps us with your feedback. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Lovely to see you. Thank you, Ali.
Okay, bye.
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 Bye.